people are always stunned at. They're like, holy cow. Oh, we're streaming on Facebook? Let's do this thing.
I was kind of setting it up over here, and it was like I hit enter before it was like done, and now I'm like, all right,
This is how we do.
this
We
is
just
how
go
we
live.
this is how we roll. For anyone who does not know, this is Alissa Daire Nelson, and Alyssa's awesome, and she believes you are freaking awesome too. And I love the background for anyone who isn't watching, because I am going to repurpose this as a podcast. You've got Joy down like in your backdrop, Joy from the movie Up, which is like one of my favorite movies in the
Yeah,
world.
my daughter colored that picture for me years. I mean, she's now 13 years old, so it was probably 6 or 7 years ago that she colored that picture. And Joy from Inside Out, not Up, not that
Oh, sorry, Inside Out.
we're not that we're mincing cartoon movies because
No,
whatever.
that was a ridiculous error on my part.
But Joy is literally the epitome of me. And one year I actually dressed up as Joy for Halloween, and it was the most fun Halloween that I'd ever had.
I love, yes, Inside Out. And like, what was your, like, do you love that movie? Like, do you think that movie is just insanely good?
So I personify everything. So it totally goes up my alley with regards to helping people understand like what's going on inside of you. Like, let's just notice that, and now let's talk about it. So we're not going to make sadness feel bad about who she is. We're not going to make anger feel bad. Like, they all serve a purpose. Let's just make sure it's serving you. So I loved the personification all through that movie. And I think they're supposed to come out with a second one, aren't they?
Wow. I
don't
don't know. That would be amazing.
That would
But
be
yeah, no,
amazing.
I loved the takeaway from that movie of like Joy running around trying to keep everyone happy all the time, thinking that anything other than joy was like a bad emotion,
Right.
and just phenomenal. So, and one of the other things I just have to say is that, we randomly kind of connected in a Facebook group. I think it was like the One Funnel Away challenge. Like, I had
Yeah.
commented on something and you had commented on something. And I was like, oh, I know that name. And like literally, I can't remember. I think I told you this one. I'm not sure. So around 2 years ago, I had never listened to a podcast in my life. And I heard about the EO Fire podcast, and I fired it up. And it was your interview with JLD, which was the first podcast I ever listened to, period. And then I ended up listening to hundreds of episodes. But it was like a very pivotal moment in my life of starting to listen to podcasts and entrepreneurial podcasts.
Oh my gosh. It's super funny about that podcast. Can we riff on this podcast for just a minute?
Riff.
So John had put out this challenge he's got his 100-day freedom journal, right?
Yes.
And so it's like, achieve your biggest goal in 100 days. And I was like, maybe I'll write a book. Okay, let's just write a book. And then he said, we're taking interviews of people who have completed the 100-day challenge, et cetera. And I was like, okay, and John and I and Kate and I have known each other over years. John was who I learned podcasting from. Ironically, the very first podcast I ever turned on was also on EO Fire. And so, that's a story for another day, but we ended up becoming kind of friends over time. And so he's like, yeah, Alissa, this is perfect because, writing a book is something that everyone wants to do. So let's do this. Well, I wasn't ready, and John records about a month ahead of publish, and the book wasn't quite ready, but we had to record. And at the time, the name of the book was What Competition? Setting Yourself Apart so that your competition is irrelevant.
All right.
Worst book title on the face of the planet. But it is what it is. So by the time the thing went live, the book title was no longer that. It was From Frustrated to Frickin' Awesome, which is where the whole frickin' awesome thing comes from. But so part of me makes me cringe just a little bit. And part of me is like, you know what? Good job, Alissa, because you had the courage to go out and do something before it was perfect. Done is better than perfect, and you're going to stumble along the way. But it was also a big part of what helped me to actually get that frickin' book published. And now I'm working on the second edition of that book, which is super exciting. And that's, maybe we'll talk about that later. But so I think that's super funny that was your very first podcast interview that you listened to. Because for me, it was like, is this good enough? And the thing is that you still can make a connection, even if it's not perfect.
Absolutely. And then like, what is perfect even? You know, like I don't even know what that is. Like I try to chase it, but I'm not sure what it looks like. And that's awesome that you went ahead and you've got like the recording with like the one title and then the title change. I mean,
Yeah.
that's awesome. And I mean, you threw yourself out there, you got it done, which is
Yeah.
amazing.
The landing page for that for the longest time was like, hey, I know you're coming for the first 2 chapters of that book, but guess what? The book name is actually from Frustrated Frickin' Awesome.
I love it because you're like,
Gotta
I
love
know
it.
this is what you're looking for because you
Uh-huh.
heard this podcast that's listening to like 500,000 people, but that's very cool. And so one of the things we've got to jam out on is superpowers. At
Yeah.
least that's what I call them. Strengths. I don't know. So I mean, really, at the end of the day, what I love, and really, I mean, I heard it on like when you were talking to JLD. You know, I'm a huge fan of people taking the time to figure out what they're really good at and
Mhm.
using that to propel themselves forward, to speed themselves up towards their goals. And so like
Yeah.
what's your like overall take on that process of like learning what it is you're really good at?
Yeah, I was just talking to a friend last night about how much I love superhero movies. And he's like, okay, well, DC or Marvel? Like, and I was like, well, I tend towards Marvel, but honestly, I don't discriminate because the superhero story it's so full of goodness. And I believe we're all superheroes. I truly believe that. And so, like if you follow the storyline of a superhero, it's realizing that they have this special strength. And often in the movies, right, they're like, oh, this is actually a curse, right? That's how it starts out. I'm different than everybody else. Why can't I just be normal? All of those things. And it's this process of embracing my different is my superpower, right? And the stumbles and the falls and the fails along the way to honing that and training that so that you can use it for good, right? Because in the movies, it's always about how can I use this for the greater good? Unless you're a villain
Right.
with superpower, yeah, and that's a whole nother story. But that's what I love about really identifying your superpowers. It's like what makes you different, right? So our society tells us, and we innately want to idolize people who have come before us, right? And so we want to be like them. And the thing is, we were never built to be like them. And so that is the first hurdle, is to realize that, maybe I'm not Oprah. Maybe I'm not, whoever you might idolize, right? But I am me. And just because I may not be able to have that superpower, I don't have to jam myself, my circle self, round self into that square peg or square hole. Excuse me. And let's see what else I might be able to do instead. So
Absolutely.
that's what I like about that process. But often it does take someone from the outside, just like in the movies, to say, hey, this is kind of actually cool, right?
Yeah, I have so many questions. Like, so one thing I can't help but ask is, as far as superhero movies go, like, what is like on your top, like, of what's one of your favorites or your favorite?
I'm a huge fan of the Avenger movies,
Yeah,
and I really don't. It's interesting because I thought for sure this friend last night who was asking me about DC versus Marvel was
yeah,
then going to ask, like, well, who's your favorite superhero?
yeah, yeah.
And the honest answer is that I don't have a favorite because every one of them is awesome like and contributes to the whole. What I
Yeah.
love about the Avenger movies is that they come together,
Yes.
and their weaknesses or their areas of
Mm,
non-strength are filled in by the strengths of others, which to me just compounds this human experience that we have. Like
yeah.
we're all these lopsided puzzle pieces,
Hmm.
and we fit into the puzzle, but we're not the entire puzzle,
Yeah.
right? I actually don't really, not a super fan of Superman. Super fan of Superman. Anyway, because he was like everything, right? And they had to conjure what is his weakness going to be because, there's no way to defeat him, right? And there had to be some way to defeat the superhero. And so they created kryptonite, right? And so I'm not a huge fan of Superman because he's got all the things, but the Avengers, there's always some weakness or soft point, or like with the Hulk, right? He's a bull in a china shop. So like when he needs to break buildings down and throw cars, like he's your guy. But like if you need something articulate and dainty to do, not your guy. And so I just love that aspect of leaning into, where your strengths are and calling you in when we need your special superpower. And then when we don't, hey, let's call in somebody else. Let's call in Captain America.
Absolutely. All right. And I mean, yeah, definitely. And that is what I love about the Avengers movies. Not just because they did this epic, like, I don't know how many, it was like 17-year long, like saga of like getting
It
all the
was
stones and
amazing.
everything. Like that's just like once in a lifetime, like crazy. And I read the Infinity War stuff growing up, the comic books. But I do love how they complement each other. Like there'll be scenes where I'm like, how could, you know, Black Widow fit into this scene, because Black Widow can't fly, she can't do this, she can't do that, but there's always like this perfect thing of, oh, you're going to go over here, you're going to sneak into here, you're going to
Yeah.
fly over here. So definitely. And the other thing I was going to ask was, what's like a real world example then of
Yeah.
someone figuring out their superpower and
Yeah.
running with it and seeing how it changes their
Yeah,
lives?
thank you for asking that, because we do have to bring it back to reality, right? So first, it's monitoring that, and often the things that we're criticized for when we're younger are actually the things that are our superpowers. I can't tell you how many entrepreneurs I work with who have a diagnosis of ADHD. Okay, but if you look at it from a strengths point of view, nearly always, and again, I'm not a scientist, I don't have statistical data on this, but I've worked with a lot of clients. Almost always they have activator, they have ideation, they have learner, right? They're just like where their brain is always active, right? So I was never diagnosed with ADHD, but I was the kid who was put in the back of the room in the third grade with the desk with no chair so that I could stand and tap my foot and do my math. Like, I'm certain that if I were to go in, they would diagnose me. But here's the thing, I've learned how to leverage it. Now, for a long time, I also felt ashamed of it. Like, why can't I just sit down and focus and study and, whatever? But I've learned how to leverage it so that it actually benefits me and it benefits people around me. So a strength theme is not a strength until it is giving you energy and it is bringing energy to people around you. So that's an important aspect of that. So the question I always ask people, whether they have their strengths finder profile done or not, is tell me the last time that you were jazzed.
Mm.
And jazz looks like something different. Like for me, jazz looks like all kinds of big emotions and whatever. For my husband, he's he's very much more even keeled, straight faced, etc. But he still gets that feeling, right? So it might look outwardly different, but when was that last time that you felt energized by a particular task or a particular situation? Now let's figure out what about that situation was really the thing, and let's duplicate that. And that's why coming from a strengths base is so important. Instead of figuring out instead of focusing on what is it that you do poorly and let's figure out how you can do it less poorly, let's figure out what jazzed you up and let's do more of that.
Absolutely. And I think that that's a tough, like, it's so common in school. You mentioned schools, that's a good one. Like, a lot of times it's like, well, this kid who was really introspective, you should have spoken up more. The kid who
Yeah.
spoke up a lot, no, you should have been more introspective. It's almost like this,
Mhm.
we need to even, like, school and work and companies tend to try to kind of even things out a bit. And I think that a lot of times, just like you said, like, you end up in the place of, why can't I do it like other people are doing? Why can't I sit still? Why can't I,
Yeah.
and I think that a lot of times that imbalance comes out of trying to get really good at the stuff that I'm never going to get good at. And so
Right.
then it's like, and I mean, and then just embracing what I'm really good at, and then figuring out how to, either get leverage with the rest of the things, get help with the rest of the things. But I have definitely seen how running with a strength can be far more energizing and
Yeah.
productive and impactful than trying to prop up these weaknesses, so to speak, or these
Yeah.
parts that aren't as strong.
What's also interesting about that is that most of us have grown up with this idea of work ethic, right?
Mm.
And that the harder you work, the better fruit you'll gain, right? And so, and this is something that people really have to wrestle with, because they think if it's easy, if it's fun, well, that's not work. So I should figure out a way to make it harder. Right? And it's really uncomfortable actually to lean into the things that are really super fun, because you're like, well, why do I get to do that when other people have to do this drudgery? And then you look at the other people who are out doing quote drudgery, and they're like, oh, this is amazing. I loved, the data entry and the research and the this and the that. Everyone has their own special secret sauce, right? That just really gets them jazzed up, that not only are they good at, right, but that it actually gets them excited. And of course, Galen, I don't know how many people in your audience are solo entrepreneurs, but that's a large portion of who I work with, right? And so they're like, well, that sounds awesome, but I'm the only one working here, so I have to do all of the things.
Mm.
And I don't have the money to hire out X, Y, or Z. And so, there's, depending on the person's situation, there's so many different ways that we can manage that. And we could dive down that rabbit hole for probably the rest of the interview. And I don't want to consume it all with that, but that's something that we often address in coaching. Is like, okay, so you love being out with the people, but you hate doing the paperwork. Okay, let's reframe this. Let's look at it through the lens of what gives you energy. And now the paperwork is just retelling that story, right? Or it's, this is a means in order to be able to serve them. So it is about figuring out what is the lens that we're looking at whatever task through that can get you excited. There's a strength theme called competition. And when people have competition in their top 5, it's super fun because we can make anything a competition. And so I had a client not very long ago who hated doing, oh gosh, what kind of paperwork was it? I'm totally blanking now. But anyway, we were talking about emails because he hated getting the emails done, right? And he's just like, these emails, they're just sucking me dry and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, well, how many emails can you get done in an hour? He's like, I don't know. I've never timed it. I'm like, okay, go time it. Like legitimately front to back, you got to go to go to this and go to that and research this and whatever. Like, is it 7? How many emails can you legitimately get done in an hour? And he's like, I don't know. I'll go figure it out. So he came back and he was like 8. I'm like, cool. Next time, do 9.
Mm.
Right. And so you engage your strengths in order to get something done. He was like, okay. And now it's a fun competition, right? Now that doesn't work for people who don't necessarily have the strength theme of competition, but because he's wired that way, it totally made a difference with how he viewed his email and tackling that.
Yeah. And I think I definitely want to take a second to just recap I'd say the impact of what you just said around reframing of, like you said, so I mean, one of the things that popped into my mind was, first off, what you said, which is fascinating, which was, and I can't help but frame it this way, is like one man's jazz is another man's drudgery, where it's like, and the whole idea of joy and fun, like, no, you're supposed to work hard. It's supposed to hurt. If it doesn't hurt, and if it's not, and if you're not hustling and hurting and burning out, like, it's not working. And it's pretty fascinating very quickly from a personal standpoint. So my day job is financial planner, and number 1 on my list is I have to have fun with the people I meet with. And I said that to someone once, another advisor who's very, successful in their own right. And their jaw just hit the floor, like, fun. Like, that's your number 1 requirement. And I'm like, yeah, like when I see their name pop up in the caller ID, I want to be happy to answer the phone.
Yes.
Otherwise, I'm not going to enjoy working with them. And anyways, and I remember that person just being like, no, not fun. Like, we're not here to have fun. And I was like, why not? And so I think that's amazing what you said about, it can be fun. And then when you see other people doing something that you think is drudgery, maybe they love it. Like, maybe that person sitting there and doing all the paperwork loves getting all that stuff done, and the satisfaction of like moving that paperwork along. I hate paperwork. I don't do paperwork, but I pay someone to do paperwork for me because I hate it so much. And then the last thing I really wanted to make sure we touched on is, yes, most of my audience, small, very small, either very small business or solopreneur. And so there is that whole thing of like, how can I possibly outsource if I don't have the money, or how can I possibly leverage if I'm all by myself? And so the reframing sounds just massive, of taking that
Yeah.
thing that you're framing as difficult drudgery and reframing it as something that you can enjoy doing, or you can like kind of like gamify a bit to like get yourself
Yeah.
going.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, summarized, sir.
Awesome. And so then the next thing I had to ask is, so you've touched a little bit on how you help people. So I'd be interested to know more about that. Like, so you've got the Strengths Finders, which is a test that helps people
Yep.
figure out their strengths.
Hmm.
And then you personally work with those people. And what are some of the big, massive things that you help
Yeah.
those people achieve?
So, people, the entry point to working with me is always, I want my business to be bigger, right? I want more revenue. I want my business to grow. Why? Because money solves a lot of problems. So that's the entry point. But what I actually work on with people more than anything is the fear of success. And so, we have this idea that there is such a thing as work-life balance. So work-life balance is a zero-sum game, means that it's at zero. So if you're balanced, then everything is even across the board. So if your business goes up, what else takes a dive? Right. And people don't actually even consciously think of that, but we've seen it enough in Hollywood, we've seen it enough in the public eye that people believe it. And so we have to unravel that. So I actually assess 8 different areas of their life,
Mm.
business being one of them and the biggest one. But then we also look at, if they're a parent, we look at their parenting, we look at their relationships, we look at their spiritual health, their physical health, their education and ongoing learning, their contributions back to the community. We look at all of these different areas, because I want to prove to them in the first 3 months that we're working together that you can make progress in all of the areas, not just one. Because the idea is, well, if my business is going to grow, then I think what that means is I'm going to have to put in 80 hours a week instead of 60 hours a week. I think that means that I'm going to have to tell my wife, I'll see you in 3 months. Right. And so that your relationship, your most important relationships suffer, that maybe you're going to have to stop working out, right? That your health suffers, that your sleep suffers, all of those things, because we think it has to be hard. So my statement to them is, you absolutely can have it all.
Hmm.
There's no reason you can't have it all, and we'll measure everything so you can see you're making progress in all of those areas. And the stat that I'm most proud of is that 100% of my clients make progress in all 8 areas, or 7 if they don't have children, in the first 3 months that we're working together.
Wow.
um, and it helps to start erode that belief that, well, we can't actually have it all, but like, choose something. And then, I guess right now I'm choosing my business. Well, let's just throw that off, like straight out of the boat into the ocean, because you can have it all, but we have to focus on reframing into something called harmony instead of this idea of balance. And looking at what is the one goal that will cascade into all the rest. And so, ironically, I spend a lot of time working with my clients on their health goals.
Mm.
And so that's kind of another cool thing, right? No education is ever lost. I have 2 degrees, none of which are anything related to business. The first one is in nutrition, and the second one is in nursing, right? So, but ironically, that's one of the things that I work on them with, or work with
Mm.
them on, is their personal health. Why? Because when you prep the asset, and you are your best asset, when you prep the asset, everything else falls into place. And
Wow.
so it's fun because it's a very holistic view, and we do talk about their marriage, we do talk about their kids, and obviously
Mm.
the degree to which is all personalized, and that's one of the things I love about one-on-one
Yeah.
coaching. So that's basically what I work on with my clients, is teaching them that they can have it all, and really infusing that belief, and then watching them go out and crush it.
Well, I'm loving the certainty with which you are debunking massive commonly held beliefs around, nope, you have to sacrifice this for that, no, you have to work crazy hours, and we have to jam out on one part of what you just said, but one of the things I was going to say was, yeah, that whole idea of like work, like you being able to just confidently say you can have it all. Like I'm sitting here like just mind blown, like for anyone who's not seeing my reaction to what you're saying, I'm just like, what? And like 8 areas of life, and you can have improvement in all of those areas. Like it's not typical, like that whole idea of work-life balance. And even like you're saying, the word balance itself lends itself to the idea that something is off, something is up, something is down. And you said harmony, replacing that with
Mm-hmm.
harmony. And that
Mm-hmm.
sounds phenomenal. And the first time my eyes went wide, the first thing you said that really hit me was fear of success.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that, have you happened to have read anything by Stephen Pressfield?
Yes.
Yeah.
Art of War. No, the War.
Yes.
Yes, the Art of War.
The
Mm-hmm.
War of Art.
Art of War. War
Art
of
of
Art.
War, War of Art. It's lying around here
It's been a
somewhere.
little bit.
It's
It's
got to
been a
be
few
the
years
War
since
of
I
Art.
last
It's got to
read
be the
it.
War on Art. The War of
Mm-hmm.
Art. I have one of his books right over here, but I won't grab it. He talks about the big granddaddy fear
Yeah.
of them all is fear of success.
Yeah.
And like, I think a lot of people would hear that and say, no, I'm afraid of failure. I'm not
Right.
afraid of success. I want success. You're nuts if you think I'm afraid of it. When in fact, I do believe that that is
Right.
a deeper fear that almost everyone has.
Right.
So like,
Because
what is that?
well, so here's what it's all about, right? Is ultimately we're human at our core. And humans are a social species. Like if we go back to biology, we as a species are social, which means that we live in community. We can't do life all on our own, despite again another myth that our society teaches us, which is we have to be independent and stand on our own 2 feet. We have to be resourceful and self-sufficient and some of those other things, but we need other people. And so the thought of being successful and yet being incredibly lonely or having lost all of the other things, losing your integrity, losing your, the personal relationships. And I mean, how many movies do we see this in, right?
Mm.
Over and over and over again, these ultra successful people. And so there's 2 things that come out of that. Number one is being filthy rich is filthy, right? It's bad. It's somehow awful, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it must mean that you are a terrible person because you're choosing copious amounts of money over everything else. Now, the topic of greed and some of those things, that's a whole nother topic. But the regular person internalizes is, if this then that, if I get rich then I'm a jerk, if I get rich then I'm going to be sad and lonely, if I get rich then I'm going to have a drinking problem or a cocaine problem, or I'm going to end up
Mm.
committing suicide, right? And so because at our very core we're a community species, the thing that we're most fearful of is losing a space in the community. So it all makes sense, that we would be afraid of choosing dollars over choosing community and real people.
Because that's the false choice we've been led to believe exists when it comes to
Correct.
that.
Correct.
And tie it back interesting to superheroes.
Mm-hmm.
So are you familiar with Myron Golden at all?
No.
He's awesome dude. I'll have to send you some of his stuff, but I saw him speak and he was talking about superheroes and superpowers. And he said, have you ever noticed that the rich superheroes tend not to have superpowers?
Correct. They
He's
have
like,
cool toys.
Iron Man has the suit, Batman's got the suit, but they don't have inherent superpowers. And they tend to be more of the jerkier superhero. Like Spider-Man is like this lovable poor kid from New York. Like
Yes.
Tony Stark is this jerk, who, obviously he's lovable, but, there's this element of like jerkiness to them. And Batman's a bit of a jerk sometimes. Anyway, so he was talking about it. He was just pointing out, he's like, a lot of times even the cultural, because the cultural things will do, when it comes to movies or stories, it's going to do the things that
Mm-hmm.
we're going to be able to accept more easily. So it's easier for us to accept a superhero who's rich because, well, he doesn't have any superpowers. He had to buy his way into like this club,
Yes.
or like the humble Spider-Man. Anyways, I found that fascinating when he pointed that out, because I was like, I'm a big
Yeah.
superhero fan. It's never crossed my mind, that
Mm-hmm.
dichotomy.
Yep. It's super, super true. So it's an either or, right? And lately, with everything we've got going on on social media, et cetera, we have this binary thinking, right? You're either left or you're right. You're either an anti-masker or you're a pro-masker. You're either racist or you're an anti-racist, right? Like, and I mean, we could get into. I actually believe that you're either racist or you're an anti-racist, but that's a whole nother thing. But there's gray all along the way, right? And so it's like, instead of labeling people as X or X or Y, right? Because labels talk about your identity. Let's instead label the behavior. Let's label, like, oh, that was a racist thing you said, versus you are a racist. Because dealing with behavior is a whole lot easier than dealing with identity. And people are going to be a whole lot less defensive. And yet what we see is everybody out there name calling. So this is my plea, y'all. Stop name calling. Like, name the behavior, but let's stop labeling people. Let's deal with the behavior, and let's not deal with the, like, labeling the person, because they're not a one-dimensional person. They're an entire person. And so if we can get away from some of this binary thinking now, and yeah, it gets more complex when we stop thinking in a binary way, right or wrong, black or white, this or that. Yeah, it gets more confusing, but man, are we a richer society for that. So anyway, that's my personal plea to anybody who's listening or watching. Please stop name calling. It's just not helpful.
Well, what you said was very interesting about the binary thing. I think that people go down the binary road because it's just an easy and it's a comforting thing. Like,
Yep.
humans like certainty. Our brains are wired to enjoy, like, putting things in boxes and not having things floating around. And so to be
Mm-hmm.
able to say, like, this person is this and that's all they are, and it's just like easy. And I think that social media lends itself to ease
Yeah.
of this,
Yeah.
where in fact, the vast majority of times, if someone sat down with that person that they're calling, racist, or calling what greedy or whatever they're calling them, if they sat down and
Right.
had a conversation with them, they'd probably very quickly realize this person has a lot of dimensions in their life. But
Yeah.
the arena in which people are communicating or judging doesn't lend itself to that. And
Yeah.
I find that time and time again, like, I definitely work on, like, the judgmental side of my brain, because I feel like I'm probably,
Mm.
if not
Mm-hmm.
as judgmental as most people, maybe a little bit more so. And it really
Mm-hmm.
comes from more of a lack of self-confidence than anything else. But one of the things is, when I do have a problem with someone and I take the time to actually spend some time with them, it, and it's not like I'm not saying it's like an overt problem, like I'm actually, like, have a conflict with someone. It's more of like,
Yeah.
I just really don't like the way that person operates. When I force myself, or take the time to get to know them, it almost always dissolves into nothing, because
Mm-hmm.
I have just painted them with this very wide brush of, I don't like them because of this, that, and the other. But when I
Yep.
actually spend time with them, it completely goes away.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Oh, there's, like, we could spend literally an entire day on this, because and this plays into parenting as well, right? So I have
Mm,
two kids, two daughters who are 13 and 14 now. And from the beginning, because I felt labeled as a kid, I wanted to raise them with a different experience than I had. And my parents are loving parents. I'm not saying anything negative about my parents, but they were just a very different parenting style than what I've um, had with my kids. But from the beginning, it was removing the label of who they were from their behavior, right? And so when I'd get upset with them, it would be like, hey, when you hit your sister, and this is when they were little, they don't hit each other anymore, thank goodness. When you hit your sister, it makes me upset because it doesn't match the person you are. The behavior doesn't match the person. And that helped them to solidify their self-esteem without having them internalize their behavior as being, I'm a bad girl.
mhm.
No, the behavior was bad. The behavior was damaging. You are an amazing human, and these are all the reasons why. And so that same idea can go into parenting, it can go into friendships, it can go into these head-to-head conflicts with, like, hey, this behavior upset me, and here's all the
Mhm.
reasons why. But let's talk about about that behavior and where that might have come from. And when we can, instead of going and again, if you're watching, you can see my hands, but if you're listening, my hands are sort of facing each other, right? And this is how we sort of head off in a conflict, right? Face to face, what I'm looking at is something very different than that what the other person is looking at. But what if instead we go, hey, I'm going to come over by your side and I want you to frame for me what you're seeing. Help me see what you're seeing. Help me understand your experience. And when we can do that, all of a sudden, you know, you're not looking at different things anymore. You're still of your own lens, but you're stopping to listen to it. Tell me what your experience is. Right. And so, and this is a lot of what I go through with my clients with regards to communication coaching, right? Because it's always like, oh, this stupid employee is so lazy and da 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 da. Why don't they just do what they're told? Well, I don't know. Why don't you ask them? Like, let's have a conversation, right? But the method in which you communicate with, whether it's your employees, whether it's your spouse, whether it's your kids, whether it's somebody on Facebook, it all depends on, are you looking to win or are you looking to understand and come to an agreement?
Are you looking to win or are you looking to understand? I love that. And I was thinking, like, how do we wrap all this up? We've gone down so many amazing, what's that?
So much goodness.
So much goodness. So I could, yeah, as you were talking, I thought, you know what? One of the things I think would be cool to explore as we wrap it up would be that labeling in an individual of themselves. Like you were talking about it to other people and everything, but I'm also seeing it like, and I mean, I'm also thinking of the audience of solopreneur and all this. Like, I do feel like people do go down that road of sort of labeling themselves a certain way rather than the behavior. Like, like I'm an inherently whatever, like lazy person, or I'm inherent
distractible, don't follow through, all of those labels that we give ourselves.
Yeah. So what would be like a final coaching on like for the entrepreneur who's like labeling themselves and wants to kind of snap out of or make a change? Like, what's the route for that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I should say it's impossible to become non-judgmental of others if you haven't first done it for yourself. And judgment and curiosity, here's where it really drives home. Judgment and curiosity cannot live in the same space at the same time. Yeah, that's right. That's tweetable, write downable. Judgment and curiosity cannot live in the same space at the same time. So we first have to notice, what are the things that we're seeing in our own head, right? And then get curious. Where is that coming from? Right? How would I talk to, and I use this metaphor a lot. We're all 10-year-old kids on the inside. like we might have grown up on the outside, but we're all still 10-year-old kids on the inside. How would you speak to that 10-year-old? Right? Like, how would it be helpful to speak to that young child that's inside of your own chest? Is it helpful to say, you're such a stupid bleepity 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 bleepity? No, that's not helpful. Right? It's much more helpful to go, hey, so what got in your way? Let's figure this out, right? Get curious first and come at it with a compassion. One thing that we didn't really talk about today is that 2/3 of our weaknesses are actually rooted in our strengths. Because when we don't know what else to do, we just do more of what we're naturally wired to do. And so those become overuse patterns of our strengths. So what's going on here that is causing me to behave in this kind of way? Right. And then when our strengths get burnt out because we've used them so much, what we do is we shut them down. And now we're not contributing. We're not using them. So we're kind of locking them in the corner. And that also becomes a weakness. Right. So when we can get curious and go, what is the pothole I fell in? Why did that happen? What was the trigger? And what is the oxygen I need in this situation? In order to be able to thrive, right? We cannot we can survive for a short period of time underwater, but we can't thrive there, right? And then even after a minute and a half, we can't even survive anymore. So what happens if you go without oxygen for a period of time? You kick, you thrash, you claw, you do whatever you can do to get your head above water, right? So that behavior doesn't look too pretty. But the root of it is not that you're a terrible violent person. The problem at the core is you didn't have oxygen, right? So looking at, with curiosity and compassion, what's happening here? And we can't do that if we're so busy judging ourselves for the behavior. Oh, this pattern came up again. Like, okay, that pattern came up again. All right. So how can I, like, what is the trigger that caused that pattern to happen? And, how can I take personal responsibility? How can I build in safeguards so that that doesn't happen again? Right. And this is where coaching, someone outside of your jar looking in, can be so helpful to help you unravel some of that stuff and go, okay, well, tell me more about that. Right. And even in that conversation, you remove some of the judgment and you're able to get curious. So, bottom line, it comes back to curiosity, curiosity, curiosity.
Oh, very cool. And I love that. Like, it's almost like a clinical approach, like rather than like the spiral of, oh, I stayed up late again. I didn't get up early and work out again. Blah, 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 blah. It's more of, yes, this is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Let's dig deeper. But like for a person, like there's a saying, you can't do brain surgery on yourself. It's like, you have to have that like external, like looking at it and reframing it and taking the charge out of it. It's amazing how
Yeah.
quickly someone from the outside can just like, hey, like let's reframe all this. Let's dismantle some of this. That's amazing. So I definitely have a book on my list that I feel like I've got to read, which is the one you wrote.
Well, the new one, the second edition of that book is coming out in November, and that will have an Audible version. It will also have an accompanying workbook,
Oh,
which I'm
very
super
cool.
stoked about. The current book is good, and the second edition adds some more really awesome things.
Very
So
cool.
it'll be even better. But by all means, go buy the book now.
So what's the best way to stay like on top of things so we don't miss out on that book coming out?
Yeah. So the best way is to head over to my website, daretasucceed.com. And Dare is spelled like my name, which is DAIRE, the number two, succeed.com. And you can get in touch with me there. You can certainly get on my email list from there as well, and we can stay in touch. But yeah, it's pretty exciting, some of the things that are coming out in the next few months here.
That's amazing. That is amazing. Well, thank you so much. I am definitely going to read the book you've got already and then take on the new one in November for sure. And Audible, like I love me some Audible, like, the audiobook
Yeah.
versions. I joke that I never read anymore. I just listen to books unless it's like a workbook kind of thing. But
Yeah.
it's so much easier to digest, or just easier to multitask, do some yard
Absolutely.
work.
Well, and the cool thing is that you can listen to the Audible version and then buy the accompanying workbook. Not that you don't have to buy the workbook. You can use a regular notebook. That's totally fine too. But the workbook will give you some more guidance, and so it'll be a fun little duo there.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you so much for joining me today. This has been amazing. And I can't wait to re-listen to this because sometimes I'm like, I got to re-listen to that podcast. Like I did not catch everything in that first go around. So I got to re-listen, but thank you so much.
There was some gems in there. You're amazing. So
Oh,
thank
thank
you,
you.
Galen, for the opportunity and for letting me join you, and for those of you listening for letting me and Galen speak into your ears for a short period here. It was really truly a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you so much.